Welcome, Ashley. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books.
Thank you, Zibby. Thank you for having me. As I was telling you before we started recording, I am a huge fan of your podcast. I love it. I listen to it every day. I don't know how you do it, but the content you put out for us, for all of us listeners, we just appreciate it so much, especially during these COVID days when you just need something to get through the day and you're always there. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. It really, really means a lot to hear, especially from an author whose book I so enjoyed. To know that you were out there listening to other interviews. It's awesome.
I have to start by just telling you a funny story that my son, so I listen to your podcast a lot in the car, like when we're driving to school and driving home from school. And my son, who's now 5, I always, he humors me and listens along with me all the time to your podcast. But he always, especially when he was a bit younger, he would hear your opening and he would say, "Mom, why is this lady saying you don't have time to read books? She's saying you can't read books. You don't have time." And it's just so funny. And I have to kind of, trying to explain to him what it means. But he was always very concerned about the title of your podcast and what that means for me. But I've assured him
well, okay. Maybe I should put a disclaimer that, it's just a joke. I read lots of books. I love reading books.
You're allowed to read.
I have an almost 6-year-old, but now he's still 5. And the other day he was in the corner and he was holding up some little toy and he's like, "Hi, I'm Zibby Owens from Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books."
They're always listening.
Yeah, always listening. 5 is the cutest age, by the way. I'm really sad that it's coming to an end. Having lived through it now 4 times. Anyway, okay, can we talk about your amazing book, The Push, which is alternately chilling and life-affirming and worrisome, and I just wanted to run out and find a therapist to throw in the pages. I was like, oh my gosh, now's when she needs a therapist. Wait, now she needs a child psychiatrist. Wait, now, oh no. And then last night, literally in some scenes, I'm I have to close my eyes. Anyway, so The Push. Tell listeners, please, what The Push is about and what inspired you to write it.
Sure. So The Push is about a woman named Blythe Connor, and she comes from a history of women who have struggled deeply with motherhood in various ways. But she's quite determined that her experience is going to be different and that she's going to sort of be this warm, empathetic, present mother that she never had. And so she and her husband have their first child, a daughter, and her name is Violet. And at first, Blythe sort of goes through the various kind of typical early days of motherhood that we can all relate to, tired and sort of just overwhelmed. But then as as Violet gets a bit older, she kind of starts to realize there's something wrong with Violet. There's something different about her. She's quite aloof and doesn't really express much emotion. She's not very attached to her mother. And as she gets a bit older, she starts to witness some behavior that she feels is malicious towards other children. But the problem, of course, is that her husband cannot see this. Nobody can see this. And she's really the only one who believes this about her daughter. And so they sort of try to move on and in their marriage and have another baby, Sam, who's born shortly after. And in Sam, she sort of finds that, connection that she had hoped to have as a mother with her child, until something very tragic happens in the family. And they're all sort of forced to kind of face, what has happened and who their daughter is and who Blythe herself is. And the rest of the novel is sort of looks at that unraveling of the family from there. And so that's sort of what happens. Without giving,
I have to say, the whole time I was reading the book, I kept flashing back to your opening scene of the book, which makes you wonder, how did they arrive there, right? You have basically, I don't think I'm giving anything away because it's the opening scene, but you have the mother in the car, looking in, right, through the window, and you're wondering why, what is going on? How did she end up there? And as you go, you still don't know, what is it? How is this happening? So it's almost suspense, but it's not a thriller. How would you even describe? Because I don't view this as a thriller. It's more like a psychological drama of sorts. But yet there's this element, this big question mark hanging over it.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because a lot of people have described it as a thriller, and I didn't really set out to write a thriller, or it wasn't kind of what I had intended. I think I love like a lot of us do, just a page turning book, like something that, you just want to find out not so much what happened, but sort of why, like, why did that happen? Why have we got there? And it's funny, one of my editors described it as sort of emotional suspense, which I thought was maybe a better description for it than thriller, because I think people who enjoy thrillers will hopefully enjoy this book because of the pace of it. But it's really more emotional suspense than anything, and it's really sort of more of a family drama, I think, than kind of a straight thriller where you're trying to figure out what happened.
And you can definitely tell in the writing just how close to early childhood you are. I mean, you can tell in some books, like, okay, maybe this author has young children, maybe she doesn't. And, with a galley, you never really know how old anybody is, right? Like, I'm not looking at the author photo. I don't have any context. I just always am like diving in. And in this book, I was like, this author definitely has had children recently. Like, because you remember all of it. And it's like, I started finding myself wondering what your view on motherhood was, because there seems to be so much ambivalence on the part of the characters. Did you feel that way? And then I was thinking, if you didn't have any of these ambivalent feelings, how would you have put these characters together? And even just like the sort of inherited trauma of generation after generation of mothers who are disappointing their children. Tell me about where this is coming from for you.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. So I started writing this book when my son was my first child. My son was 6 months old. And he had, when he was born, he had some health challenges that we didn't know about. We didn't expect them. And so, it sort of puts you in this situation where, you're planning for a baby, and you enjoy your pregnancy, and you have this healthy pregnancy, and you think everything will be fine. And then when he was 2 weeks old, we discovered it was not. And we were going to be spending a lot of time basically living in the children's hospital and trying to get him better and figure out how to manage the problems that he was having. And so that was we know how hard those early days of motherhood already were. And at 2 weeks old, 2 weeks in, to kind of have everything sort of completely changed and sort of flipped upside down was very challenging. I loved him, and I loved being his mother, but I just didn't know, I guess I was learning kind of how to mother within the walls of a hospital. And, with like nurses helping you instead of, your family members. And so it was very challenging, obviously, but it also just really made me think a lot in those days about those expectations of motherhood, and that, we really, society sort of teaches us to think that it's going to be a certain way, and that we're going to feel a certain way. And it's going to look a certain way. And then when it isn't, it's very isolating. It's a very isolating experience. And you really don't feel like you can really relate to anybody. I remember sort of all my friends having babies at the same time, which at first seemed like such a wonderful thing. And then when my experience ended up being just so different and so far from the experience they were having, it was hard. And so those were kind of just the things that I was sort of mulling over in those days. And then having sort of, the very, the mind that I do is sort of kind of taking it a bit further and sort of wondering, like, my gosh, like, this was not my experience with my son, but what would happen if it was even worse, if you didn't like your child, or you couldn't feel like you loved your child, or your child, did something that you couldn't forgive, or you really regretted having that child, like, what would that feel like? And so those were kind of the things I sort of started writing about. The stuff I was writing about was so much darker than what I was going through. I mean, I was going through a hard time. The stuff I was writing about was darker, and maybe that was a way of sort of working through or coping with what kind of I was going through at the time. It's kind of just really just exploring that. And those were kind of the seeds of thinking that grew into sort of the character of Blythe and her daughter Violet, and the story that became The Push. And then for the, once I started kind of exploring Blythe and figuring out who she was, especially kind of through revisions, I started to understand that I couldn't really understand Blythe without understanding the women that she came from. And so that was when kind of the backstory started to develop, which is basically the story of Blythe's mother and Blythe's grandmother and the challenges that they went through. And so that, and I was very much interested in that idea of inherited trauma and kind of what we carry from the women before us, and how much of that is kind of this maternal anxiety, and how much of it is true, in our DNA, in our genes. And so that really interested me. Although I feel like I must disclaim this on every interview I do, that my mother is nothing like the mothers in the book, nor is my grandmother. So I feel like I owe her the service.
I had a feeling this was coming. I could tell you were going going to that place.
Yeah.
I do not blame your mom. She is
Yes.
off the hook. You seem pretty normal from, our little limited interaction.
Well, it's really funny because I didn't talk to my mom, my parents, or really anybody much when I was writing this book about what it was. It was such a sort of internal and living within me. And then when I realized that this was going to happen and the book was going to be published, I had to tell my mom what the book was about. And she was like, oh, how interesting. It was a lot for her to take in, but yes, not.
It's interesting too, how at one point you have Blythe go to the support group for mothers whose kids have done sort of unpardonable offenses, right? Because I always think about that when I hear about, the mother of this shooter or the mother of this, like, how does that mother feel? Like, of course, the mothers of the victims, right?
Yeah.
But why? You do your best with your kids, right? And I think as parents, like, I know I've had moments where I'm like, oh my God, I cannot believe my child did that. Like, and then it reflects on me, it reflects on my parenting. What does it say? And then you wonder, like you did, sort of, let's extrapolate and make this the biggest mess ever. Then what, right?
So funny. I always think that too. I mean, when you hear something in the news or see something that's happened, I mean, I always think of the parents, and I always think, if the biological parents were the people who raised them and were involved in their lives, and my mind always goes there to think also, like, what did the parents know about their child, and did they ever suspect, and did they ever think that something like that could happen? Did they believe the humans they were raising capable of that? And if they did they say anything to anybody, or would you say anything to anybody? And it kind of comes back to that question that I think I tried to explore in the book, which is, like, ultimately, what do we owe our children? Like, what do we owe them? We, in many cases, birth them and raise them. And what does that, like, what are we obligated in that? What are we, what's our obligation in helping them to, live in this world? I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, a lot of it comes back to just the nature versus nurture argument, of course. But it almost goes further than that to just, like, I don't know, just kind of asking yourself, like, what are the lengths that you would go to, and what would be, it's really more of an ethical debate. But yeah, it's funny that you say that, because my mind always goes there too.
There was just in the paper this week, and this episode will come out not this week, but now we're in, I don't even know what we are, November, pre-Thanksgiving. And there was just, like, on the New York Post, some man pushed a woman onto the subway, and he had done so also in January. And the mother had said, don't let my child back out on the streets. And they did. And he did it again. And she's like, I told you. And it's her face in the paper being like, and he was adopted. Not that that matters, but I don't know. It's just, like, so on the theme we're talking about, not necessarily all the themes, but wait, so let's go back to the fact that you had a 6-month-old son and decided to try to write a book at that point, and that the book ended up becoming this, which is, like, which is a good book, not like the tired musings of a completely stressed out new mother. Tell me about that undertaking and how you did it.
Well, I think it did start as the tired musings of a overtired mother. It's gone through a lot since then. It's gone through a lot of revisions since then. But, I think it's interesting. I had always wanted to write, and sort of couldn't. I was writing. I was, taking writing courses at night and writing on the weekends, and but I had, like, another full-time job and career, and I couldn't afford to do, like, an MFA when I was in school, or I honestly felt like I couldn't really afford to pursue writing for a lot of my life, because I needed to go to university and work part-time to pay for that, and then get a job that could pay the bills when I left. And writing just never felt attainable to me, writing as a career. And so I just didn't pursue it that way.
What kind of jobs did you have?
Well, I worked in public relations, in like public relations agencies. And then after that, after working in agencies for a while, I did move over to publishing and worked at Penguin Canada as a publicity director. So I was just really focused on that and writing when I could. And then even though, I would have loved to be a writer full time, or to consider myself that, or be published. And so when I had Oscar, when I had my son, I realized I wasn't going to go back to work after that, because I mentioned, because he had these health challenges and life just felt different, and I just couldn't didn't really see myself being able to balance both of those things. And so it was around that 6-month mark where I feel like we weren't spending as much time in the hospital, and I was home a bit more, and we were lucky to have like a bit of babysitting help through the week. And so I used those hours to write. And it's funny, you had an author on your show, Ruman Alam, on,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
which was such a good interview. And I thought he put it just perfectly. He talked about when you have children, sometimes it can really clarify for you what you really want out of your life and who you want to be and kind of who you want to show up in the world. Like, who do you want to be for those children? Who do you want to be for yourself? Your time becomes so limited when you have kids. And I really started thinking about that limited time very differently. And I just thought, I need to do it now. Like, this is when I need to pursue this, because this is the time. And so, yes, I was tired and exhausted, and it's very hard to write during those months. And it is a privilege to have help with childcare. That is for sure. And if I didn't have help with childcare those few times a week, I wouldn't have been able to do that, I don't think, because that's really how it started. Was, our babysitter would walk through the door, and I would like run past her with my laptop under my arm, like running to the coffee shop on the corner, trying to get in as much as I could while she was here. So it wasn't easy, and I think without help it is very, very difficult. But that was just, and there was just so much on my mind then too. And it's funny, it's sort of, a lot of writing advice you get is like, write the story that's just burning inside you, or that you feel like only you can tell. And I did have a bit of that. I had this sort of creative energy around that time that I just felt compelled to do it. And I don't know. And looking back now, of course, I'm like, how did I don't know how I did that. Like it seemed, I don't know if everything were to happen all over again, if I could do it again, but it just felt like what I needed to do at that time, if that makes sense.
How can I even ask, how is your son? And this might be personal, but is he okay?
He is. Thank you for asking. That's so kind. Yes. He has a chronic illness, like a chronic condition. So he will have that, forever, but it is very manageable now. And he is just thriving and is just like the most incredible 5-year-old, almost 6-year-old like yours. And so now it doesn't even feel, now those days feel so far behind us when things felt, so much worse, because he's doing so well and we've learned how to manage it. And so it does get better. Yeah.
And tell me, I know you said earlier, I can't remember if we were recording yet or not, that he was upset that I was always talking in your car radio about how, moms don't have time to read books. So tell me about your like reading life. Are you reading a lot around the house? Like, do you have books everywhere? What's your like relationship to reading like these days? Or do you just not have the time?
Yeah, we do. We read a lot in our house. I think we do read a lot. My kids love books, which is great. I'm definitely a nighttime reader. I have a hard time reading during the day, but I read every night. And I think and it's amazing how fast that can add up if you just commit to doing it at night. I love to read new releases. I love to read debuts. I love to read like whatever the newest book, which is probably why I love your podcast, because you have so many like authors whose books are just coming out. So it's such a nice pairing with reading what's publishing at the moment. But we do read a lot. And I think it's so true that, your kids, I always make sure my kids know how much I'm reading. And even though I'm reading at night when they're asleep, like the books are piled on the bedside, and we go to the library a lot and buy books a lot. And I feel like that, I hope that kind of, my kids kind of grow up with that, but we'll see.
It's so funny because I didn't set out to do books that were coming out now. In fact, I remember at the very beginning when I was trying to get an author on my podcast, the response was, well, so-and-so doesn't have a book coming out, or like and I was like, so it never occurred to me that that authors would only be interested in doing publicity around new books. And so it's sort of like, it's become this because that's what the authors need the most. But I never would have thought, like, I was like, oh, I'm going to go into, I'm going to like work my way around my bookshelves. Right. But luckily most of those authors end up coming out with new books. So then I'm like, oh, okay, let's talk about your new book, but really I want to talk about 110 years ago. So
yeah, it is funny it's funny, isn't it? And I think now I would have thought that too. Now that I'm writing, I sort of get it a little more, because it's hard to kind of talk about one book and be writing another book. Like you sort of have these two totally different worlds in your head. So I think a lot of it is people, needing to kind of shut out the world and dig into the next project, and you can't even let your mind go back to the other book,
Yeah.
So I feel like, maybe that's part of it, but it is funny. Yeah. But there's something fun about always wanting to dig into whatever's new and whatever's out. And it's, I'm definitely a news junkie. And so I love reading the book that everyone's talking about, the reviews are happening. And I just find that adds to the whole experience of reading for me. So
there's some books though, like I know they're going to be big books, but like, I know I wouldn't have bought it. Like, I don't know. This is like my big thing. I'm always like, I was pitched that, but I didn't do it. My husband's always like, well, maybe you're passing on way too many books. I'm like, well, I just have to stay true to like the books I would want to read. And like, maybe it's going to win a huge prize, but like, I'm not sure I would want to read it. I don't know. I have to want to read it.
Still have to want to read it. Exactly. I still have to speak to you in some way.
Not that I haven't read tons that don't go beyond my comfort zone, and I'm so grateful for them. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if it's just a little too. I don't know. I don't even know why I'm talking about this. But
no, I know exactly what you mean. I know what you mean. Your books still have to speak to you. Even like you have to. I mean, I don't know, but if I'm not enjoying a book, I will put it down. I will never force myself to finish a book, because that's just not what reading is to me. Reading is just about being swept away and enjoying it, like enjoying every page and enjoying every minute that you're devoting to that book. And so if I'm not in love, I usually don't finish. So I get it. I totally get it. You have to.
So as a big book lover, tell me about the thrill of the publication journey for you then, from when you were starting to write it and then editing, and then what happened? Tell me about what happened.
Gosh, it was really crazy. It was a wild ride for sure. I worked on the book for about 3 years from that time I was talking about when I first started, to get it to where I felt like it was maybe ready to kind of go out there in the world. And I think because I'd worked in publishing for a couple of years, although I was not on the editorial side, I was on the publicity side. I sort of, I had I think I had an idea of how kind of things worked and, going to agents and, but even though you have that knowledge, you still don't know what you have. And I hadn't shared it with that many people. And so as I shared it with got a few more readers, I started getting more comfortable with going out there with it. And again, because I worked in publishing, I had, kept friendly with, it was Penguin Canada at the time. This was just before the Penguin Random House merger, with the head of Penguin Canada, Nicole Winstanley, and she and I would meet, a couple times a year for tea or whatever, just to keep in touch. And I remember, so I met with her. This is when I was just, working on my query letters, getting ready to send it out to agents. And I met with her for tea, and I was so anxious to meet with her because she didn't know that I was writing. When I worked there, I'd never talked about wanting to write a book or publish a book. And I didn't tell anybody that I used to work with that I was doing this because it just seemed, like just such a dream, pipe dream, and was so interior, living within me only. But I thought, okay, I want to just get her advice on agents. Like I had this list of agents I wanted to go to and just would love her opinion on it. And so I sat down with her for tea and I said, I have something to tell you. I'm feeling a little nervous to tell you this, and she interrupted me and said, let me guess, you've wrote a book. Was I that transparent? Like I thought I thought you would never guess that I would do this. But, so it was kind of funny, but she, gave me some good advice, and then it was sort of out to agents. And from there, it was really a whirlwind, and it was life-changing, and I will never forget how that all felt, to kind of, even just I will always remember, and I will always save that sort of email back from my agent, Madeline Milburn. She's now my agent, but just her reaction to it, and just, it's really incredible to see just this dream, to see something that you've worked on for so long that you just don't know if it will ever be anything. And then to have these people kind of take a bet on you and have this kind of reaction to your work it's a very magical thing. And I will just never forget it. And I don't take it for granted. And it was I feel very lucky to have had that experience. And then from there, it kind of very quickly sort of went out to publishers and went out into the world, and and then we're here. So it really was magical is kind of a funny word, but that's just how it felt. It just felt kind of magical. Yeah. Kind of incredible.
It's amazing. Are you working on anything else now?
I am. I'm revising the second novel now. Which has been a really fun process. The process of writing it has been very different than writing the first one. Just because life looks a little different now. I have 2 kids, but they're a little bit older, and we're in a pandemic, obviously. So that's another challenge, but so I've been working through that now, and just kind of trying to, I'm so new at this still, so just kind of trying to figure out I still am just trying to figure out how to write a book. This is the second one. So I, just kind of working my way through it. And yeah, but
Can you give a glimmer of a plot or not really? Or is it too early? If it's too
know.
early, don't worry. I don't want to jinx it or anything.
Early, but I feel like it's for the same readers of the push. I feel like it's for those same kind of readers. It's family drama, it's emotional suspense, it's motherhood and female friendships and marriage. Yeah, I'm really excited about it. Yeah, I'm enjoying writing it.
That is like a combination that I would be like, yes, sign me up, pre-sale, like pre-order. Okay. You sold me on that. That's good enough. I will definitely be reading that book. Do you have any advice to aspiring authors?
Well, after I just said I have no idea what I'm doing.
I don't believe that at all. So scratch that and be honest.
I have advice, I think, for new mothers who are writing, because I think that's my experience. That's kind of the place where I can offer advice. And I think it's sort of two-part advice. And the first part is that it's okay to ask for help to write your book specifically. Like, it's so hard to ask for help, period, as a mother, as we know this, or as a parent, especially when your kids are super young, because you just have so much anxiety about other people caring for your kids and all of that. And something that I had to learn with the first book when my son was so little was that it was okay to ask my mom or have a babysitter, or obviously my husband, like whoever, to say, I need help for 2 hours, and it's because I'm going to go write this book, and kind of making that really a priority, like showing people that writing a book is a priority for you, and that writing is as important as the things that, my husband got to go out to do, like go to work where I was home. So kind of making it a priority, committing that time and letting other people know about it, giving yourself permission to make that as important as doing the errands and going to the grocery store and everything else. So that was kind of my number one. But I think the part two to that advice is that, everybody says, so many writers, accomplished writers, say you have to write every day. And I really believe that when you have little kids, you cannot write every day, and it's okay. And I did not write every day. It took me longer to get this book done, but I could not write every day because I was exhausted and I was overwhelmed, and babies get sick and things pop up. And some days I just did not have it in me, even if there was a blank slate, for the rest of the day. Some days I just could not rally to write. And so I think if you're a new mom, throw that advice out the window and just do your best. Just write when you can get those windows of help, right? During those windows of help. Something I could do every day, which I do recommend doing every day, is think about the book. You can think about the book even when you're not sitting down at your computer to write it. And so I would think about the book at the park, or think about the book when I was walking, or think about the book when I was bouncing the baby or whatever at night. It's funny, I won't say which writer it is because I don't want to freak her out, but I live across the street from an accomplished Canadian writer, which is kind of funny. And she has no idea who I am. So as I said, I won't mention who she is, but I remember this is with my second, and I was going through revisions on the push, and she was my second baby. She was such a bad sleeper, and she was up so much. It took me so long to get her to bed. And I remember like standing in the dark in, my house, like rocking her and bouncing her from the witching hour until the wee hours of the morning, and looking out across the street and seeing this other writer's office light on, and just thinking, oh my God, she's in there writing her next book, and she's able to write for hours on end. And I would just sit there and bounce my daughter and think, I wish I had that. I wish I could do that. And it made me so anxious, thinking that this woman across the street had all this time and I did not, because I had this crying baby. And so I couldn't write every day, but I could think about the book every day. I could make notes. I could come up with ideas. I could feel committed to the project every day in other ways. And so that is my best advice, is don't worry if you can't do it every day.
By the way, some people find having too much time to be like a paralysis of sorts as well. I mean, if you just have like blank pages in front of you and endless amounts of time, I find it harder to get anything done than when I have like 2 seconds. And so writing is like an Instagram post, and I'm like, well, that's all I got. Like I can't even remember last time I opened up Pages or Word on my computer. It's like anything I like quote unquote right now is in the body of an email, or it's a post, or it's something. And I'm like, well, you know what? It might not be this way forever, but This is what we got right now.
Yeah, that's what you have at that time, right? And
like, gotta go with it.
We know being a mom is hard, and so that's just, you got to do whatever you can get done. So you can't live up to other people's expectations of what it looks like to write a book.
Yeah. And whatever you're doing, because you look amazing. And I know I say that because like I'm particularly disheveled, but you look so put together. Like you're like Kristen Bell, like on her way to the Oscars or something. And I'm just like, oh my God, with this great book. So I don't know, for all the drama, you're from the outside at least, looks like you have it made. So
that's very, very sweet. Thank you.
So I'm really excited for you, and I can't wait for this to come out in January. And I just I'm just so thrilled. I'm so thrilled for you, and thanks for our little intro pre-recording and the conversation and the hours I got to spend with your novel, which were great.
Zibby, thank you. That means so much coming from you, truly. So thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you. Let's stay in touch. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.